So, welcome to today's UK Treescapes programme knowledge exchange event, and thanks so much for coming. I'm Alice, the programme manager for the UK Treescapes programme, and I'm here with my colleagues from the programme, Clive Potter and Julia Hart, the Treescapes ambassadors, and Abby Stone, our communications and knowledge exchange officer. As most of you will know, the UK Treescapes programme funds interdisciplinary research on UK treescapes with the aim of significantly improving understanding of the environmental, social, economic and cultural functions and services provided by UK treescapes to inform decision-making on the expansion and protection of treescapes for the benefit of environment and society. And this workshop is part of a series of events that we're running, primarily aimed at developing capacity and sharing knowledge amongst researchers focused on UK treescapes. So today, Forest Research have kindly agreed to share a research impact evaluation framework they've developed that could help support treescapes projects in building impact narratives for their projects. So before I hand over to Liz O'Brien of Forest Research and ask her to introduce herself and her team and start the workshop, I just need to let you know that the workshop is being recorded, and we may share it publicly via our website or possibly our Treescapes YouTube channel. So just to let you know that's the case. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of Zoom etiquette, just helps everything run a bit more smoothly. If you could switch your cameras and microphones off during the main talks, that would be great. And then we could turn them back on again at certain points that are a bit more interactive to join in with discussion. If you've not already done so, could you edit your name to include your affiliation? Just helps people know who you are. So if you click on participants in the Zoom menu and click more next to your name and then click rename, you can let us know where you're from, which Treescapes project, or whether you're from further afield. And you can submit questions via the chat function or by raising your hand. Also, Liz has said she's keen for people to just speak up if no one else is speaking or waiting. That would be great. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Liz now.
Thanks very much, Alice. So I'm just going to share the screen with you to start the presentation. Thanks for coming along this afternoon. So I'm head of the Society and Environment Group, Research Group at Forest Research. And presenting the seminar with me is my colleague, Sarah Paul-Schneider. What I'd like to do this afternoon is talk about the research impact evaluation framework that we've developed in Forest Research. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Dave Edwards at Forest Research, who's developed this framework in collaboration with Laura Marr. And we've been using the framework within the Branching Out Treescapes project. And I think that's why we've been asked to kind of come along today and to talk about it with you and to tell you about it. So just in terms of the agenda for this afternoon, Sarah and I are going to do an introduction to just outline the framework and how we're thinking about the kind of theory of change within our project and how that might lead to impacts. And then we want to have a sort of bit more of an interactive session with you. We have got a very short break, potentially 5 minutes, which I know is quite short, but we want to get on and have another interactive session after that. And then just end with a reflection about, what people think about the framework and the sort of things that we've been asking you to do this afternoon before we close. But I think the thing is today that we want to kind of learn from each other. So that's one of the kind of aims from the workshop. And other aims are about introducing the framework, discussing the kind of theory of change, potentially thinking about kind of visions and outcomes for your work packages within your Treescapes projects, and kind of involving you in getting your thinking caps on. So often we kind of think about the results of research in terms of output indicators rather than changes within sort of policy, practice and wider society. So we want to focus today on these sort of wider impacts. And this might be something that you want to consider in your Treescapes projects. But as Alice said, we want to think about developing a narrative of impact for our projects. So just before we kind of dig into the framework, I just wanted to mention which Treescapes project that we're involved in, Sarah and I. So we're involved in the Branching Out Treescape projects, although I know she's involved in 2 others as well. But in Branching Out, we are thinking about urban treescapes. We're linking kind of biophysical data, spatial characteristics of those urban treescapes, along with kind of social and cultural values that we'll be collecting from people within the focal areas that we're looking at. So we want to then think about kind of tools and techniques to communicate some of those values to a wide range of stakeholders, from kind of publics through to planners and policymakers. And the project's led by Professor Mike Wilson at Loughborough University. He's director of the Storytelling Academy within Loughborough. And we've also got involved Forest Research, the University of York and the Open University. And I guess, you know, we're thinking about research impact particularly within the Branching Out project because myself and my colleague Olivia are leading work package 4 within the project, and that's very much focused on dissemination and impact. So we wanted to kind of build on some of the work that we've been doing in forest research to then bring that into the Branching Out project and kind of take it forward. And in Branching Out, we're also focusing on some focal areas. So we're focusing on Milton Keynes, York and Cardiff. And we'll be thinking about the range of different stakeholders that we want to kind of engage with in those focal areas. So that's just a little bit about kind of branching out. Because I know the people joining today, you know, you'll be from different kind of Treescapes projects. So part of the thinking about impact is about considering how we integrate research with policy and practice. So kind of trying to move away from this idea, which has kind of lasted quite a long time, of transferring knowledge to various kind of recipients, which is really more of a kind of communications activity. And we want to move much more towards kind of multi-way knowledge exchange and ideas of kind of co-production through dialogue and collaboration. So that's more about kind of knowledge mobilization, which emphasizes the dynamic nature of the process. So the research integration and knowledge exchange together can lead to a range of impacts, which is what we want to kind of focus on. But why do we want to have a focus on impact? Well, you know, for a range of reasons. So it can help us to consider who might benefit from our research. So it can improve accountability. It can improve the quality of research. So by encouraging that engagement with the potential beneficiaries and end users of our research, we can get sort of feedback quite early on, and we can learn from that, and potentially that can inform what we're doing and the actions we take. It can also help us to maximise societal benefits from our research by focusing researchers and stakeholders' attention on delivering impact rather than focusing on the kind of short-term outputs. You know, how many people came to a particular webinar or how many stakeholders have been engaged. Just that's the output side of things, but we want to focus on something that's much, has a sort of longer term outcome and a wider impact. And then it can also help to improve reputation as people are kind of coming together, often at quite early stages of the research project and working together. So, you know, what evidence do policymakers take note of? I mean, this is a slightly light-hearted slide, really, but just thinking about the sort of hierarchy of evidence that policymakers consider. You know, so it's not always the kind of research evidence that they go straight to. It might be other things. It might be, you know, opinion-based evidence. It might be something from the media. It might be kind of, you know, the people in the street, lay evidence. So that, you know, impact pathway, it's not always linear. It's not always neat and kind of tidy. And we think about, you know, research and how it's taken up. But there's a lot of other types of evidence that people might be thinking about and drawing on. So what I want to do now is to introduce the research impact evaluation framework. So this is something that, as I said, my colleague Dave has led on with InForest Research in collaboration with Laura. And we've InForest Research to got some core evaluation questions. It focuses on different types of impact and then on the causes of those impacts. And then finally, it's thinking about the kind of lessons learned. So if you'd like to know more, then do look at the paper that Dave and Laura have written. But there's also this kind of handy one-page kind of summary of the various kind of building blocks of the evaluation framework. So it's really a kind of launch pad for research teams and stakeholders to think about how to translate, sometimes isolated elements of impact and reasons for those into a sort of, comprehensive and coherent narrative that can help with learning and dissemination. And this approach, focusing on different types of impact, has been written into the science and innovation strategy for forestry in Great Britain. And the importance of evaluation and the use, incorporates the importance of evaluation, but also kind of stresses the need that for collecting qualitative and quantitative data to think about research impact. So I'm going to go through each element of the framework briefly before handing it over to Sarah to take you further on. So the kind of core evaluation questions, there's three main questions, in terms of the impact, what or who has changed? In what ways has that happened? How do we know about that? What's caused the impact? So how do those changes occur? Why do they occur? What sort of factors or processes cause the impact? And then the lessons and actions. So what lessons can we learn? Which actions potentially should we follow from that to generate sort of impact? So those are the kind of overarching questions for the framework. And then we go on to the kind of impact. So there's a range of different impact types identified, and it's trying to kind of, stimulate us to think beyond the kind of instrumental impact and identify other ways of generating kind of impact. And we can also think about impact, on the researchers, as well as impact on stakeholders that are involved in our projects and wider communities. And we've just got a few examples from the Branching Out project of things that we're thinking of. So instrumental impact, changes to decisions, actions, policy, a sort of concrete change and impact, and in branching out, that could be about, the change or the development of an urban tree strategy. Quite a few local authorities don't have urban tree strategies, so development of one would be fantastic, but even a kind of change to an existing one would be really useful if it could take in the sort of integrated types of values that we'll be identifying for urban treescapes through the project. Then there's conceptual impact, so that's changes to kind of knowledge and awareness and attitudes. So we've got quite a strong focus within the project on the social and cultural values of urban treescapes. And we're hoping that there's going to be greater awareness because of the ways in which we're going to be communicating what we're finding from our data to various kind of stakeholders and wider publics. Then there's capacity building, so that's about changes to skills and expertise. And in branching out, we're going to be working with some citizen scientists on urban tree observatories. So they'll be gathering data, we'll be undertaking some training. So they'll be gaining skills from that training and in going out and collecting some of the data. And then connectivity, so that's changes the kind of number and quality of relationships and potentially developing kind of trust. And we can think about that with the stakeholders, in branching out that we've got in our focal cities, but we can also think about that in terms of the relationship between the researchers within the project. And as many of the Treescapes projects, they're all interdisciplinary. So people coming from, different universities and organizations, but also from very different disciplines, and developing those relationships is going to be, a really important part of the projects. And then finally, an impact around culture and attitude change towards knowledge exchange and research impact. So thinking about the branching out project again, it might be that through our storytelling knowledge exchange activities, people get a better appreciation of storytelling as important in terms of knowledge exchange, but also potentially a kind of greater understanding of how co-production can contribute to kind of policy and practice. So those are the kind of 5 impact types. And then we want to think about, well, who's changed? Who are we impacting? And we could think about different stakeholders. That might be policymakers and practitioners. It might be communities and researchers. So, in branching out, we think about local authorities, urban tree managers and planners. We've got our citizen scientists. We've got the people, the publics that we're going to be engaging through some of the storytelling, and the researchers ourselves. I think we're going to be changing through the project, and we'd like to think potentially of others as well. And that could be something like developers, understanding a bit more about the importance of urban treescapes in business and housing development. And then we want to think about the causes of impact. So within the framework, there's this generic list of reasons for impact. And it's really about encouraging researchers to think about the relationships between processes that have led or could lead towards impacts, including some of those less tangible reasons that might otherwise kind of go unmentioned. And the causes of impact might be negative or positive. I won't go through the whole list, but in terms of problem framing, for example, there might be impact due to, example, a sort of active negotiation of research questions and research design. In terms of research management, we might have impact because of the integration between different disciplines, or because of the way in which research is promoted, or the research culture. In terms of inputs, we might have impact because we've got adequate funding, we've got the right staff capacity, we've got kind of legacy that we've brought in from previous research, we've got access to the right sort of equipment and resources that are needed. And in terms of outputs, for example, we might have impact because of the quality of those outputs, and also the kind of the usefulness of the content that we've identified, and written in different ways for different audiences, and because we've developed those outputs in an appropriate format. So there's a range of ways in which we can think about the causes of the impact that we're having. And then finally, the last kind of bit of the jigsaw in the research impact evaluation framework is the lessons learned. So what kind of worked, what could be done differently? So it's really trying to think about, encouraging that critical reflection that can contribute to decision making and improvement of future impact generation. So it's really about developing a credible story, and if possible, we could develop that story with some of the key stakeholders within our projects that can help us kind of reach consensus on kind of what changed, why did that change, and then we can think about this. So what does that mean? And that reflection can happen, throughout the projects that we're undertaking. So that's a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour through the kind of evaluation framework. And the idea is that it's building blocks that can be assembled in different ways to support the development of impact narratives. And as I've mentioned, we're using this in branching out project, but we're also using it within forest research at the moment, and we've started to develop knowledge exchange and impact plans for our research and to embed those from the start of our research projects and programmes. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to my colleague, Sarah, and who's going to take you through the theory of change and how we're kind of using the framework to consider our impacts. And ultimately, we can think about what data we gather to explore the impact of our projects. So if that's all right, Sarah, over to you.
Of course, fantastic, Liz. Thank you for introductions and getting us here. So before I start off telling you all about the theory of change and all of these kind of things, I'd like to emphasize that this is an ongoing process that I've started a couple of months ago, and just to inform our thinking in terms of how can we reframe impact and how can we think about impact in terms of work package 4 as part of branching out. This doesn't mean that all of these things have happened. It's just a way of starting our thinking, engaging in discussions with other work packages and these kind of things. So please don't think it's all out there already. No. And also, I will be sharing a couple of slides with you that actually entail parts of the exercises or parts of the activities I'd like you to do later on. So I will be talking you through the whole kind of theories of change process, which I combined with the research impact framework, and just make a couple of comments of what did I pay attention to when I did it and what came up for me. So these kind of things. So, but before I do that, I would just like to share a couple of ideas about theories of change. It was quite new for me, so a lot of capacity building for myself here when I started the process. So, and I learned that theories of change are actually part of theory-based approaches to evaluation. So they're trying to open the black box rather than just following the causality models of logic models or these kind of things that just track input to output. And I think that really came through in what Liz has said earlier as well. So it's about really testing our assumptions of how things work in practice and how it changes people. So theory of change works super well with that. So it's very much interested in uncovering different perspectives or different theories of how something works for other people. So not only from our perspectives as researchers, but also for other people. So therefore it's quite pluralistic and trying to really discover how other people engage with things that we produce and what impact it finally had. So, and broadly we could say that, there are two kind of theories involved when we construct theories of change. And that is on the one hand, implementation theory, which is about hypothesizing about the links between inputs, outputs, and impact. So this is more akin to logic models. So it's really looking at what leads to what, and that is the very important part as well as the program theory behind it. It's about uncovering what actually changes. So, and that is where the impact categories are very important because they can tell us a lot about, or they stimulate the thinking about different outcomes, the changes that people actually underwent in the process of engaging with our output. So, and just to re-emphasize, this is an iterative process. I've been working on the theory of change and I've been revisiting it, getting other people to comment on it, grabbing their input and trying to revision and revise. And it's a living document very much. So that is, thanks Liz, already the next slide. So when I started the process, it was very much about going beyond just thinking about output. Hey, this is our product. We've done research. Please use it. So the typical kind of logic models from input. We did something, and then here's the output. We've got our PhD scholarships. We win awards. We produce an app. We've got our articles published. All of these things. No, but it goes beyond that. So theories of change actually try to uncover what happens after this process. So it's very much geared towards actually defining first a vision. First of all, it's about, hey, within this project, we really have ambitions. We really want to change something, want to contribute to transformative change at the end of the day. I think that is what all researchers are passionate about. So, and it is nice that within the context of theories of change, you can be encouraged to really formulate a vision and try to be ambitious, and then thinking backwards from there. And how can we actually make this happen? What are the different steps involved? And using the research impact framework in this regard really highlighted the different aspects of impact. But I will speak about that just now. If Liz clicks one more time for me, that would be awesome. Thank you. So don't be discouraged here. This is a very well-looking theory of change, really starting from the top with our vision, which we have for branching out overall. So this has been negotiated with the whole kind of project team actually, and within my work package as well. So I'm working backwards from that. Okay, what kind of things, what kind of changes do we basically need in order to arrive there. And there were a couple of instrumental changes. Obviously, the big flash ones that everybody is out for example, that town planners actually use the outputs we produce. They use the framework we design, and they change their practices according to this. But in practice, this does rarely happen. People don't just take an output from research and run with it and implement it. So connected to that are a couple of other changes, conceptual change. Do people actually feel as relevant to them? How people perceive the whole process of knowledge exchange and all of these kind of things. And how do people perceive us as a research team? So it's about the connections we build with those people that we are trying to be in touch with. And again, the notion of having knowledge mobility, of having not just unilateral transfer of knowledge, but actually learning continuously from the people we engage with. So transdisciplinary work is very important. And what we see there is was definitely that the thinking evolved from the vision and the long-term outcomes that we need, and then finally going more towards the short-term. So if we think about long-term, that could mean anything that is beyond the immediate project. So even after project is ended, because that's what we want people to use our stuff after we are done with it. That's why we use it. But medium term could mean something like middle to end of the project, and short term like really during the project quite early on. So these kind of different time scales that might be important as well to look at in order to find a bit of a way through there. So we can see I use a lot of different impact categories and try to connect them logically, but they are associated in a way. I can't just expect people to use something without really having the skill to do it. So that would be a capacity building issue. But if Liz clicks one more time, then I'll have the next slide. And this is an example that I really whittled down. And I chose one stakeholder in particular because I think they're very, very important to have a long-lasting impact. And that is the town planners themselves. And they need to be wanting and skilled in the application of whatever kind of framework or whatever kind of tool that we are producing. So, but in order to, and that is what we see in the instrumental change column there, right after the vision is like, okay, that is the instrumental change that would be amazing. That would change so much, but how do we get there? And again, as I already said, it's about capacity building. Town planners need to be able to use like the framework. And town planners might also want a community of practice, to have a social learning space. So having an enduring connectivity, having a network with which to engage along the process of learning it, of seeing how other people use it and how other people apply it to their work context. And this is also associated to conceptual change. Town planners need to realize the importance of social and cultural values and not just think, oh, well, it's nice that you say that, but I actually see the merit of this and I actually want to do this. And we can only achieve that by really having the connectivity, by having this trust relationship with people, with the stakeholders that we're trying to engage with. They need to feel understood and they need to trust us and we need to trust them. So it's building this enduring connectivity. So we can see everything is kind of connected, but it's not a linear progression. It's more a synergy. So if you would click for the next slide, please, Liz. Fantastic. So now the next step would be, hey, I want to arrive at this instrumental change. I've put this now as the end goal, because as I said, there are a couple of other preconditions that actually lead us there. But what do we actually need to do in order to arrive there? And I think it's helpful then to actually start right at the beginning, in the here and now. And that is what I already said. In this diagram, it's number one, the research team and various stakeholders form lasting relationships and trust. So that is something that we really need to do. But what kind of activities do we actually have to pursue in order to make that happen? And that will be ongoing co-production of research. It is this transdisciplinary approach. They need to be involved in at every stage, basically. We can't just chuck knowledge at them and expect that everything goes well. No, we need to learn from them as well. And in that way, we might be able to facilitate a cultural change towards transdisciplinary work, to actually see the merit of it, to see why story-based approaches to convey or communicate social and cultural values are actually important. So that might be an aspect that emerges from this enduring connectivity. And likewise, town planners and other professionals might realize the importance of social and cultural values, but they will only be able to let that happen at the end of the day if we can demonstrate to them that it's important to their work realities, but also that it's suitable and that it takes on board all the different kind of organizational and whatever kind of issues that they are experiencing. So, and at this stage, I would like to say this is very much geared towards the town planners as a stakeholder group, but at the same time, and that was in the bigger picture overview that I've had earlier, there's also a big branch of influencing policymakers to actually make accessible funding to make this happen, because it's not only about people's willingness to apply something, but also whether they actually have the circumstances and the organizational setups to do so. So there's another kind of theory of change behind it that focuses on policymakers and changing their perceptions and all of these kind of things. So that is just part and parcel of the whole thing. And now from there, we also need to consider, how do we train people up for this? Because just knowing, oh, there's a framework that I could use doesn't tell people how to use it. So we need to think about the capacity building aspect of it and how people might use it. And then again, having a bit of a community of practice to get people talking about facilitating a safe learning space for people and all of these things. And I noticed that when I was working with this, very much I could connect all the outputs that we had as work package 4 to these different kind of activities. So they kind of really appear from the context of the activities that we'll be planning. For example, it was planned to have a webinar series, and which would really directly be correlated to capacity building and all these kind of things. So, and then finally, we would have some instrumental change at the top there. So next slide, please. So, but after we have identified these kind of activities, the things that we really need to do in order to achieve the desired change, the next step will be, what are the indicators that I've actually achieved it, that my activities had the desired outcome? So, and this is just an example. It's all just thinking we didn't do all of that yet. And it's just a way of starting to think about what might be important. And this is just an indicative list. It's nothing complete. And, sorry, just had the chat popping up here. So it's just an indicative list of indicators, and it's not complete, it's not comprehensive. It's just about showing, hey, it is important to understand how town planners feel in this regard. It is really important to see the changes within themselves, and not only saying, oh, they have attended X amount of webinars, so therefore that automatically has the desired outcome. No, we cannot assume that attendance equals knowledge gain or something like that. So we really need to engage with people in depth to find out whether something changed and how something has changed. So, and this is also then associated to the kinds of methods that we use. I mean, it's always useful to have quantitative methods involved in having an idea of who thinks about what to what degree and all of these things, but also the qualitative part of it. So to really get into depth, what changed with people, to understand why and how something changed, rather than just saying if something changed and to what degree. So we've got quite a lot of different methods that would be at our disposal. And I have to say, the good thing about this is that we can use different methods or we can use various methods for different indicators. For example, if we will plan a survey to evaluate an event, and we could use that time and again. So we do not have to design a particular evaluation framework for each and every one of the different indicators. No, we'll try to cluster that. We'll try to cover many things through interviews or case studies and all of these kind of things. And also another aspect would be looking at the online engagement nowadays, doing a bit of thematic and maybe discourse analysis in terms of who engages with what material and how does it change language, how does it affect how people communicate, or how does it maybe even impact power relationships, because branching out is very much about elucidating different social and cultural values. So there will be a dimension of power to it. So we can all implement that into our design for evaluation methods. And thinking about all of this at this stage is fantastic, because we can actually implement it into our research design. So if we think about, hey, how can I evaluate the workshop that is lining up in a couple of weeks' time, I can already factor this in and gather the kind of data that I will later on need to construct an impact narrative. So yeah. And like I said earlier, it's important to also look at the qualitative side of things, because that is where powerful impact narratives might emerge from. So that is so much from me and from my presentation. We will be going into the interactive session very soon. And I would like to share my screen with you in order to give you an overview of where we will be going and what kind of stuff we will be doing. So it's all Google Docs. I hope that works out okay. I will be sharing the link in a moment. So, and if you click on that link, just bear with me. I hope this worked. Okay. Can you see stuff?
Yeah, we can see that.
Amazing. Okay. So I will be sharing the link, which will lead to this page right here. And then you can click on these links for your respective project. This is just a working space for you, and I had to organize it in whatever kind of way for you to have some space to think about the different activities and the vision, all of these things. So it's not that you'll be assessed here at all. It's just to provide the space to actually do stuff. So, and if you click on one of these kind of links, then it will lead you, if you click then on here, it will lead you to, for example, the branching out workspace. So, and within this workspace, it is a Google slide, whatever, Google document, Google slide. And within this, there is first an example of the stuff that I already presented, just to inspire you. If you need to go back to something or whatever, could always ask questions as well. Happy to help out. And an example of the vision and the outcomes, and an example of the different activities and indicators and methods. And I would like you later in a moment, basically, to do 2 activities, and you can navigate within your project workspace to the different work packages. So we've got a work package node, which we have within branching out. I don't know if you have it in your project, but I've just copy pasted this like it is to all of the other work packages. So just navigate to whatever space you feel most closely or most strongly about. And if you're working on more than one, choose one that you would like to work on and navigate to these kind of things. There's instructions right here, but I will talk you through this anyway. So this is the first activity that we will be doing, identifying visions and outcomes, which is on this slide. So there you can put in your vision at the top and working backwards from that, actually thinking about the different kind of impact categories and the different kind of changes that are necessary. And you can focus on a particular stakeholder, or you can keep it at a higher level. It depends. You can do it actually also for the whole program if you fancy, if that is better than doing it just for your work package. So there's a lot of flexibility here. So navigate to one of the appropriate work package working spaces and work away. And there's another activity later on, number 2, identifying activities, indicators, and methods. And these are the different questions that might trigger some thinking around these things. And you can access this table then and start putting into what kind of activities are necessary. And luckily, you can probably quite easily switch back and forth the different tables so that you remember what kind of outcomes are important. So the first activity is about identifying visions and outcomes. And I would suggest really starting at the top, starting with the vision right here, coming up with maybe 1, maybe 2, however many you feel is appropriate, and working backwards from there. Okay, what kind of long-term outcomes would actually be needed in order to do this? And then thinking, hey, what kind of impact category would that be? And just filling out the table like that. And thinking about which kind of stakeholders might be involved is important as well. I used an example of town planners because just to make it more tangible, to illustrate it better. And after this exercise, you will have a bit of time for that. Actually, I think quite a lot until 3:10, roughly. I think Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 or 3:10, and then we'll be talking about this a bit. And then after the break, we will get into the second activity. So I'm just gonna quickly try and stop sharing my screen and share the link actually. So no, not new share. How do I stop sharing? Stop share. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. So I will be sharing the link to the landing page. in a moment. I'm really trying my best here.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. I mean, if anyone's got any questions now, then please do just kind of pipe up. But yeah, as Sarah said, we'd like you to go to your link for your project and have a think about it. So at first, just takes a bit of looking at her examples and thinking about it. And if we give you till, maybe 3:05, maybe, and then we can have a 5-minute break before we go on to the next interactive session. Okay, everyone, I'm going to ask you to pause there if you don't mind. I can see that lots of people are writing, really getting stuck in. There's a lot that's kind of gone down, a big sort of brain dump in the last sort of 20 minutes, which is fantastic to see. Particularly like the picture of children drawing trees in the Voices of the Future workspace. That's great. But maybe if we can turn our cameras on so we can tell that it's not just me and Sarah in the room. And we can have a quick kind of chat about how you found that and kind of, did you find it easy or difficult to think about those different types of impacts?
I found the examples from branching out to be very helpful in thinking about how I would think about one aspect of the work, a member work project that I'm thinking about. It's I think it has caused me to have a bit of a better idea about things that I'm trying to plan out and seeing it in this very nice chart form, and also comparing it to other projects.
Yeah. Anyone else got any sort of reflections on how they found that? Was it
just to say from Voices of Future perspective, I decided to put the image up because I realized that actually what we're trying to do is to change how you understand where knowledge is. So one of the things about for us, knowledge is in what children know, and children tend to draw knowledge rather than say it. So one of the things I think is interesting, it was a sort of very instinctive reaction to put that image up, which I was actually at when that was done. But my team might like to say more, because the other thing is it was quite confusing having everybody in the room without having to have a conversation. I found that really hard. But yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think we sort of dilemmaed between getting people into breakouts and then there might be lots of discussion and not getting anything down, and allowing people just to jump in and together individually though. Anyone else got any kind of reflection on how they found it, and whether the kind of range of impacts is that, if people thought about the sort of different types that are in the framework before? David, did you?
Thinking about the long term, even at the very macro level, was very helpful. I mean, so much in academia, we produce an output, and that's almost sometimes the end point. But it's nice to see that how those outputs, whether they're literary or sort of in praxis, really go out into the public and have a separate life from just the academic world. And I think that theory of change, the sort of the definition, the success criteria, seeing how this project continues on after is really helpful. And I think, that gives me a lot to think about.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, it's, if you get a chance to read the paper that David and Laura have written around looking at research impact in forest research, I think what's kind of interesting is that they've got some of the researchers to kind of reflect back on almost like a body of work that they've done. So a number of projects that have built up to be a sort of body of evidence in a particular area. And that there are these longer term things that have been coming up in those sort of case studies that are highlighted in the paper, which is quite interesting. So that's, again, something that researchers might want to think about themselves in their sort of body of evidence as they collect it over the years. Anyone else want to say anything before we have a quick 5-minute break? any thoughts or any troubles with the vision, thinking about that long-term vision, or which came easier, the vision or the impacts? No one's going to leap
Liz,
in there.
Can I just ask, is this something that you're using across forest research or specifically in the kind of social science focus work, or?
Yeah, we're using it across forest research. That's something that kind of we had a program that kind of led to the development of this, and it's now kind of we're embedding it within forest research. So, one impact that I mentioned in the introduction was that it's gone into the science and innovation strategy for forestry in Great Britain. And that impacts on the research that we do in forest research. So, we're thinking about knowledge exchange and impact plans that are based on the kind of framework. We talk about it, a reasonably regular basis. I kind of, I knew of it obviously within forest research. So I wanted to think, we've got a new project branching out. Let's see, if we can use it there and how it might work.
Is it helping you get a kind of comprehensive sense?
I think I've lost you there, Alice. Might get you back in a minute. Oh. Maybe hold that thought, Alice, or if she's gone, we'll come back. Okay, well, let's have a 5-minute break and then come back, and then we'd like to kind of carry on. I think some of you have already done a bit of the second activity, but Sarah will kind of introduce it. If we come back at 3:15, very brief, just run out of the room, get a quick drink, come back. So yeah, see you in a moment, hopefully. Okay, well, I'm hoping that we've had a very quick chance for a break and that people are back in. I guess it would be useful to turn cameras on so that we know people are here. That might indicate that you're still with us. I can see Alice, you've come back to us. Just give it another minute and hopefully others will join us. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, turn the cameras on. You need to know you're back in the room, which is great. So I think maybe Sarah, we can go on to the next activity. Yeah, and if you could introduce that while people are coming back into the room, and I think some people have already kind of got going on the second activity already, but it's a chance to kind of do a bit more or go back to what they were doing in the first activity as well, if they want to, update that.
Exactly. Just a quick one to Alice and the question that she asked. I've been using the impact framework also for policy evaluation and program evaluation. So not only at the design stage, but also to really see what actually changed to see how our programs might affect something or not. But okay, the second part of today's session will be just focusing on identifying the different activities that we try to, or that we might need to get going with in order to achieve certain impacts and outcomes. And I've seen that a lot of people are already busy with that. So, and getting back to a point that Kate just made in the chat and also mentioned, if you feel you don't have the space that you want, feel free to occupy another work packages space, because I think not everybody is there from Membrane or from Voices of the Future. And if it's too busy, feel free to just hobble on to a different work packages slide and just change the number or something. You can claim it as your own. So yeah, if we all go back to our little workspace where everybody's been working on, there we should have the list of activities, the workshop activities, followed by the 2 slides. And so the second activity is really about identifying which activities are necessary to facilitate the changes or the outcomes, and thinking about what kind of indicators might actually be useful in order to understand what has changed. So really thinking about qualitative but also quantitative indicators of change that would really delve a bit more into depth, rather than just, how many people have read this document or have had a look at our webinar. Really thinking about, like, what do we actually want for them to change in their conceptualizations and these kind of things. So the different kind of impact categories come through there as well. And then in the last step is then again about the methods. How can we best find out whether we achieved what we wanted to achieve? How can we measure the impact that we've had, or the indicators that we set for ourselves? So feel free to go back to your work spaces now and either continue with the first table in terms of vision and outcomes, or jump straight back into the activities, depending on what you would like.
Yeah. If you've got any questions, I do just shout up. That'd be fine.
Yeah. Speak. Can happily speak. It's so quiet. Right.
And we'll give you till 25 to 4 on this next exercise. Give you a bit of time for thinking space to see what others are also, inputting into the various kind of work packages. And then we'll come back and just have a kind of quick reflection on that activity before finishing up reflecting on the kind of framework itself and the whole kind of approach. Okay, I think I'm going to ask everyone to down tools and come back together. I think you've all been doing a lot of hard work there. There's a lot gone in to the different tables, which is fantastic. And, it's really, really good to kind of see what's kind of written, and we can learn from each other. I think you can, if you're interested in this kind of approach and framework, then it's something you can think of using kind of beyond this workshop, and see about how it might kind of fit into your Treescapes project. It'd be great if people could turn their cameras on again. That'd be really nice to kind of see everybody as we come towards the end. But I was just thinking, what sort of, methods were people thinking about? Were they thinking about combining kind of qualitative and quantitative methods to try and gather data on impacts, or were they thinking about anything particularly novel? Anyone got any thoughts on that? What they've written? Want to give us an example?
I was just saying that I think the mode in which you think impact happens is quite important. I can see that change in terms of actual thinking is really important here. And it's often quite difficult to see that evidence. I'm thinking an example from previous research project in which, for Abby, who's here as well, told me about it only yesterday, is that Rotherham, where we did a lot of work, has now decided to call itself the capital, children's capital of culture. Now that's probably a shift that came from some of our work about 3-4 years ago, but that's just happened, and that kind of impact is very intangible, but actually really important. And I think some of the things about that you've said have been really helpful in kind of clarifying that, but I still think there's something about the complexity of how that gets translated into practice that's still, I mean, I did say at one point, I think Research Fish could learn a lot from what you're doing. But the complexity is really, I think you've enabled us to capture more of the complexity, which is really good.
Great, thanks, Kate. Yeah, I mean that's a really useful kind of thought, and I guess thinking about sort of outcomes and impacts can be quite intangible. And when something happens further down the line, to what extent was the research kind of part of it, or it's also kind of part of a wider things that were going on as well at the time. That's quite hard to kind of really identify. David, and then Peter.
This sort of doing the activities framework and seeing also what was there. I really appreciate that there were some fields that were populated to really inspire some of the things I was thinking about. It helped a lot. It confirmed for me that so I was just focusing on one part of the project, this catalog, creating new terms to describe tree relationships with humans and how it gets filtered into other documents like policy documents, for example. But how do you track that in the public realm? And that's what I was still trying to work out a bit. But I like, I've been looking into how to track things through website using things like Google Analytics and, click-through type ideas and sort of social media marketing, how this sort of factors into using metrics to measure social investment in a specific idea. And sort of what you had there also confirmed that maybe that's going in the right direction for me. So I was really happy to have some of those things that I was thinking about to see them already happening was very helpful.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. And yeah, thinking about kind of social media and how it's used and how we can use that, to kind of gather data on our impact, I think is a kind of developing field, really. And Peter?
Thanks, Liz. And firstly, thanks, Liz and Sarah, for today. It's been really, really helpful and really, really useful to think through our work in this way. I just wanted to share something further around the kind of less tangible aspects of impacts, and also how these emerge over time, sometimes over periods of years. And that's obviously something we struggle with things like research fish and ref impact case studies. And the example comes from some work that we've been doing in another project with Homes England. And we've had a long-standing relationship with them, and just happened to have a meeting with them the other day, and they said that some part of the work that we've done with them has enabled planners to have an increased degree of confidence in working with young people and in thinking about including young people in their work. That was something that never ever occurred to us when we thought about impacts or when we wrote kind of ref impact case studies. And so sometimes it's really useful to just think about impacts in the words of those with whom we're doing impact, to let these things just kind of percolate through over time. And I guess the practical lesson there is just keeping in touch, just keeping a relationship going over a really long period of time to enable those things to come through. Again, not easy in a 2-3 year project, but worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really useful point, isn't it? And as you say, it can be quite difficult, but there are rewards to be had if you can keep some of those relationships going in the long term. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Peter. Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think, that's really important to be open to the unexpected impacts that we don't plan for. But my question really was to the projects. I just wondered if you're using any other impact frameworks to think about how you're going to capture impact within your projects. And also, I just wondered whether this framework that Liz and Sarah have presented today, if it's something you might be interested in using in your project and picking it up in your project.
Yeah, can I just come to Kate in case that's a response to Julie before I come to Dave?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say, yes, I mean, a bit like Peter, I've just found this a really useful session. I think what I'm going to go back and do, and that's why I really wanted the slides, is reflect on what you've been doing with us and then create our own framework. I think, I mean, going back to the Children's Capital of Culture example, that was from a project which was about co-production. And one of the things I think we need to capture is our, as it were, ways of thinking about co-knowing and co-producing, not just with children, but with each other. And that's come out of doing the activity. And I think what's really important is to then think about how our practices, whether it's the critical discussion labs or drawings that children do, can be traced across the project, and then how those practices can then be seen as influencing people. So it's made me complicate impact more, but that's really good. I think you've done a really good job in helping us think, and it's come at the right time for us, because we will then be able to create our own, as it were, way of looking at impact. And it could be different, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent. Thanks, Kate. And as you say, these are potentially building blocks that you can, draw on and adapt, for the needs of your particular project. That's great. Thank you. Dave.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So thanks a lot. It's really interesting and fascinating, actually, to see how that framework is picked up by colleagues and developed further. As you, Liz and Sarah, as you both well know, so this was developed about 3 or 4 years ago. And what we've done in forest research is not so much what was presented today, but something a little bit different. What we did was have a very, very simple exercise where people simply identify the goal, the indicators, and the actions that they feel are necessary to get to that goal. And what we've done across forest research is get people to fill in a very simple template for each of their core funded projects. So we've got 100 of these knowledge exchange and impact plans representing about, half of our entire budget. And so we're using those to sort of really just get a sense of what everybody's trying to achieve and how they're going to get there. It's a lot simpler than the development of theories of change that we've been discussing today. So that's why it's really interesting to see how people have tackled that and whether that's a helpful exercise. But I just wanted to sort of give that little bit of context, because when Laura and I developed the framework a few years ago, the main idea really was just to sort of improve the language that people use, enhance the range of concepts that people use, including ourselves, to understand impact and what causes it. And the real motivation was just simply to improve that language so that we can construct better narratives, either looking forward when we think ahead or looking backwards when we do evaluations and report to our funders and stakeholders, as well as learning as well. So it was much more discursive. It was more about description and using that range of concepts that are in the framework in almost infinite number of ways to construct different stories that help us understand what's going on. So that was the original motivation. And it's just fascinating to see how it's been picked up and taken forward by others. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And I guess, within branching out, we're hoping that we kind of reflect on it as we go through the kind of project so that we kind of come back to it. And we kind of develop methods for collecting data about impact, but then we're sort of open to change, reflection as we go through the whole project. Any other comments that anyone wants to make at the moment about the kind of framework or the diversity of the impact, or whether there's a kind of impact that they think we've missed that's not kind of in the framework at the moment? There was a question that Alice was posing before she had a wobble on her internet connection that I wonder actually whether, Dave, it's kind of one that you could address. So Alice was just wondering about the kind of advantages of having the framework used across multiple projects with different focuses, and whether that allows us to think about impact. Well, it allows forest research to think about impact as an organisation a bit more easily. That's a very good question, actually, because it's quite easy to evaluate the impact of a particular project using that framework, because it has a kind of clear objective, clear goals, clear set of stakeholders. But when you try and do that across a whole program or a series of programs across a whole agency,
you just get swamped with detail. And the approach that we've taken in forest research is simply to select case studies. That's the main thing, to try and choose a representative range of projects which reflect the full range of work that FR does, and develop case studies for each of those, and just show the world that this is what we're doing. Not a million miles from what universities have to do with the REF, but a slightly different way of structuring it all. So we did that with forest research a few years ago, and on the website, if you can find it, and we can send a link, there is a 100-page report from the early days when we tried this, and then we developed a dozen case studies that use this framework. So that's one answer. But also in doing so, we often want to sort of focus on different things. So for example, some research projects have fantastic, really clearly demonstrable monetary impact, such as savings as a result of preventing an outbreak of a pest or disease, which you can show quite convincingly save millions of pounds in dealing with it earlier rather than later. Other types of projects, as we all know, are far less tangible, and it's much harder to demonstrate what they're doing. And that's often the case of the arts and humanities. But one thing I'm doing with my colleague Chris Fremantle here, as well as Laura Marr, is think through in more detail what is the impact of the arts? What are the pathways to impact for the arts and humanities? Because it's much more conceptual. It's about changing the way we frame problems and think about problems rather than direct impact to solve policy problems or practical problems on the ground. So that's just to sort of highlight the range of different types of research and to acknowledge that these impact categories appear to cope with the full range.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dave. Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say I happened across these categories because of, I think, work that Laura was doing for the Scottish Strategic Environment Research Programme, and I got sent this questionnaire as a sort of somebody who was a beneficiary, perceived to be understood to be a beneficiary of KE at that point, and I do think they work extremely well across all of the disciplines, because actually when you sit and look at them from an art and design perspective, things like conceptual shifts and enduring connectivity in particular and capacity building are all things that actually are very much things that we can recognize and see ourselves in. And the instrumental, I mean, certainly the instrumental impacts in some areas, such as design and innovation, can come out very clearly. When I was trying this, I was kind of going, it seems to me one of the bigger challenges is to get more cultural institutions recognizing that the landscape is going to change significantly, and that's something that is of cultural significance. So it's not first and foremost about afforestation particularly. It's as much about peatland restoration and changes to agriculture. It's change in the landscape is something of cultural significance. And obviously afforestation is going to be a pretty big bit of that. And actually having more cultural organizations. I mean, we've obviously got a brilliant curator at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, and we've got various, there are people interested in environment programming in cultural organizations. But I don't think, when the Alert Network was started with an event at the National Galleries, loads of artists turned up, very few curators and programmers turned up. And so actually there is a specific measurable, instrumental, practical change that could be achieved, that can even be achieved in the cultural sector, which is to see more environment-focused programming in our cultural organizations, and more strategic partnerships between cultural organizations and environment organizations, because actually there is danger that you end up with a lot of environment programming that is just more art and doesn't really actually open up the complexity of the issues. It just reifies it and turns it into a consumable cultural product that just, Disneyfies it. So I think the underlying strategic, the underlying partnership working actually is another important. Anyway, I've said enough. Thanks very much for this session.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, that's really good comment there. Really, there's a lot to take in and chew over. Thanks for that. Kate?
Yeah, just about the arts and humanities thing, I think that's a really good question. We did a project a while back, me and some colleagues, as part of the AHRC Connected Communities programme. We did some projects about looking at legacy of the programme. And the one I led was about the role of artists in academic projects. And I think what that was really talking about is this idea of creating new knowledge from a mix of disciplines, and the impact of that on, more generally, how disciplinary knowledge was then constructed in the wider sphere. So, for instance, an exhibition would be understood differently by artists and by social scientists, and that was something we had to grapple with. And I think that was quite helpful. And also, I'm hoping that this programme will do the same, which is create those opportunities to learn from each other. I mean, I can kind of refer you to that work because it is really useful, the Connected Communities programme the HRC ran, and it gave us the opportunity to do some of that thinking about how arts and humanities approaches can be understood and then how their legacy can be evaluated.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, it seems that there's a really strong arts and humanities aspect to most of the Treescapes projects, if not all of them. And, thinking about the research impact, that's going to happen with the researchers within these projects as we kind of get to know other disciplines, and we're kind of also going to reflect and branching out about that sort of interdisciplinarity and how we sort of get to know each other's theories and concepts and kind of ways of working a bit more by having some regular kind of coffee break kind of chats and catch-ups, which I think is going to be useful. And I just noticed your comment in the chat, Kate, about the mode of collection. Is that the mode of data collection? Yeah, do we think particular forms of evidence are different from others?
I mean, I think, again, going back to the discussion earlier about artworks, I think it's whether you see visual art or artworks as a mode of data or something that encapsulates knowing. And I think that's something, again, arts and humanities would have different views on. Zine or a sculpture might be seen as something that creates knowledge of its own kind. So I think that's something we'll be working with as we go through the project.
Yeah, interesting. That's great.
I don't know if there's time for another quick comment, or you want to wrap up already.
No, that's fine.
No, I just felt it might be interesting to point out the history of these impact categories, because they go way back, some of them. In particular, that distinction between instrumental and conceptual goes back at least to the 1970s. There's a paper by Kaplan, which I can share with if anyone's interested, and Carol Weiss, who did a lot of work on research impact in the 70s. And that even goes back and references the two cultures debate from C.P. Snow long ago. So that goes way back. And then ESRC in particular were using instrumental, conceptual, and capacity building for a long time to describe and evaluate research impact. And Laura Marr used them, basically that framework, to evaluate the RELI program. Some of you may remember that. And it's been incorporated into the BBSRC program on bacterial plant diseases and various other things as well. So there's quite a long history behind it all and quite a lot of theory as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Fantastic. Well, I mean, just big thanks to everyone for really kind of getting involved and getting stuff down on paper. Really appreciate your kind of engagement and involvement, and thanks a lot to Sarah for kind of organising that opportunity, kind of everyone to get stuck in their different projects. And I guess, Sarah, will those links still be live for people, or can they just download what they've done?
Yeah, of course. You could just copy paste it if you want to transfer it over. I will leave the workspaces as they are, so feel free to. And also have a nosy around if you're curious what other people came up with. I did that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. Yeah, and we can send you out the slides, the paper that Dave and Laura wrote, and the kind of one page of the research impact framework, and anything else that we think might be useful. The link to the big report in Forest Research that you may or may not get the opportunity to look at. But yeah, it's been really interesting. And thanks to Treescapes champions for giving this opportunity as well to, kind of tell you about what we're doing in branching out in Forest Research.
Can I just ask a question? I wonder whether the Treescapes ambassadors are planning to, in a way, kind of look at a way to bring the various groups together. Because, for instance, I'm sure those of us involved in the arts and humanities, if we put our various impact ambitions together on a table, might find that there were activities that were complementary across programs and would be better done by more than one project. And I just wonder whether, actually, having done a bit of this work, if somebody said, in 6 weeks we're going to put a call out, and if people want to put some of this, try and find some way to do some matchmaking or some way so that we can actually begin to coordinate some of the key strategies, and build some of the activities in partnership. Just a thought.
Yeah, we've definitely spoken about this before, and about the different ways we could bring people together. And I guess the focus up until now has been a lot on making sure that kind of interdisciplinarity beds in, but it could also be really useful to bring together people from across projects into their sort of shared disciplinary groups. I think could be really useful. Yeah. Sorry, Julie.
I just was good just to add in there. Yeah, I think we will be developing an impact framework for the programme as a whole, which I guess is why I asked that question earlier about whether this framework or something similar, or a sort of a simplified version of it, might be useful for all the projects to help feed into that overarching framework. And that might help then to sort of identify where there are potential for similarity of activities that might lead to the impacts that you're planning. So it's something that we're working on at the moment, and we'll be able to share with you hopefully fairly soon. Because I know people are quite keen to know what sort of evaluation is going to be expected from the projects and the programme as a whole. And to be honest, we're also keen to know that too. We haven't really had any guidance yet from NERC about what their expectations are. It's something that we'll be working on, and hopefully we'll be able to share with you shortly.
Are you expecting sort of guidance from NERC, Julie?
We have been pushing them for that, yeah. But I think we're going to plough on anyway, because I think the programme and the projects need to have some sort of framework within which they can operate, because you obviously need to be thinking about how you're going to measure or capture some of these impact drivers from now that you're undertaking activities, and we as a program do as well. So I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we'll wait to hear from you when you know a bit more. But just thanks again, everyone. Really good to meet you all from the various projects. And thanks for your input this afternoon.
Thank you both, Liz and Sarah. That was really, really helpful, I think.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.